The last time many of us thought about our nation's big land-based nuclear missiles was probably during the Cold War. But today, there are nearly 450 of these giant Minuteman IIIs, as they're called, tucked away in underground silos, ready to launch on the president's command. They're part of a so-called nuclear triad that includes submarines and bombers. But it's the land-based leg of the triad that's been getting all the attention lately, and it's not the kind of attention the top brass wants. The entire Air Force chain of command of a missile base responsible for 1/3 of our land-based missiles was removed a few weeks ago because of a scandal involving drugs and cheating on tests. We wanted to know what was going on. Why so much turmoil in the Missile Corps? Who's minding the nukes? And where are these weapons of mass destruction?
150 above 80 knots. Roger.
Flying over the plains of Wyoming in an old Huey helicopter, we came upon a small fenced-in lot. It didn't look like much.
So that's it right there.
Air Force Colonel Carl Jones told us that underneath the concrete near that white pole, there's a Minuteman III missile. It's one of the deadliest and most powerful weapons on the planet.
So is that particular missile armed right now with a nuclear warhead?
It is.
The warhead on each of these land-based missiles is 20 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and could kill millions if dropped on a major city. The Air Force still keeps nearly all 450 of them on constant alert, ready to go. We thought the missiles would be hidden away on some vast tract of federal land.
My goodness, is this a farm right here?
It is.
We were surprised the missiles were close to rural communities. We saw bales of hay and herds of grazing cattle.
It's a safe weapon. I mean, it's not gonna do anything here on the ground.
If by accident or a deliberate act, one of those missiles was launched, is there a way to disarm it or bring it back?
We can only launch with direction from the President of the United States. Now, once that missile is gone, there's no way to recall it or disarm the warhead that's on the missile. You know, once they're gone, they're gone.
The missiles are spread out over a wide area surrounding 3 Air Force bases in 5 different states. A web of underground, hardened and pressurized cables connect the missiles to buildings like this, where the missiles are monitored remotely miles away in capsules 70 feet underground. The control rooms hang on shock absorbers within a protective shell of concrete and steel. The system was designed in another era, the 1960s, to survive a nuclear blast. We went down by elevator and were escorted to a door that weighs 8 tons.
Ma'am, sir, I'd like to welcome you to...
We were allowed to go inside, provided we use an old Air Force camera and let security officials vet this footage. The so-called missileers who watch over and control the missiles work in teams of 2 on 24-hour shifts known as alerts. They have everything down here they need to survive. We expected to find pot-bellied veterans at the controls. Instead, we found Chaz Demarath, who's 25, just 3 years out of the Air Force Academy, and his deputy, Dana Myers, 23. This was only her 5th time on duty. When they started this 24-hour shift, they took custody of 10 nuclear weapons.
So I guess I have to ask you the inevitable question. Where is the button?
Where's the big button?
Yeah.
Ma'am, there is no button.
There's no button?
There's no button.
There are 3 switches and a key, which is kept in this strong box with 2 locks on it. Demarath has one combination, Myers has the other. It's one of many layers of safeguards built into the system.
Even though we trust each other, we don't trust each other.
We thought the work would be tedious, just waiting for something that'll probably never happen to happen. But from nearly the moment we asked the question,
Is this just boring beyond belief?
It is never boring because we have so many actions we do every day.
alarms started beeping, and the phones kept ringing.
Ma'am, I need to ask all of you to remove yourselves from the gaps at this point.
So is there anything wrong?
There's nothing wrong at this point.
We were politely asked to leave at least 8 times. so they could decode messages or deal with other classified information. The officers may be young,
If you can imagine that as being your computer is.
but the equipment is ancient. This, for example, is one of the computers that would receive a launch order from the president. It uses floppy disks, the really old, big ones. Before you got down here, you probably had never seen one of these.
I've never seen one of these until I got down in missiles.
The reason the Air Force allowed us to visit the missile fields surrounding Warren Air Force Base is because it wanted to counter all the bad press it's been getting lately at the two other bases that also guard our land-based missiles. Last year, 17 missileers at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota were removed from duty after performing poorly on an inspection. At Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, 3 missileers are under investigation for drug possession, and 91 have been implicated in a scandal involving cheating on routine tests.
I am flying back to...
Major General Jack Weinstein took control of all 3 nuclear bases in December with a mandate to find out what ails the missile corps and fix it. Let me ask you a question. Whether there's, I guess you'd call it an identity crisis with the mission as a whole. You have these nuclear weapons that no one believes we'll ever use. So do you find that that's an issue, that the question of what's the mission?
No, because we use these weapons every single day protecting our nation. Deterrence has a value. It has a value for our nation. It has a value for our allies.
General Weinstein commands a force of 9,600, including maintenance technicians who keep the missiles in working order, security forces that guard the weapons and provide a heavily armed escort anytime the warheads are being moved, and about 500 missileers who man 45 control centers round the clock. The vast majority, the general says, have not cheated on tests.
We're talking about 1% of the 9,600 people that work for me that did violate our core values.
But when you say 1%, it's not 1% of the missileers. It's, right? You're talking about everybody.
Right.
It's a much larger percent of the missileers.
Right. It's about 20% of the missileers.
Well, that's huge.
It is huge, and that's why we've taken accountability for those people.
General Weinstein also removed the directors of operations.
On General Weinstein's recommendation, the Air Force brass announced that the Montana-based commander would resign and that 9 other officers under him would be removed. Weinstein told us investigators found no evidence of cheating at the 2 other missile bases. But that's not what our reporting found. You know, it's interesting because we spoke to a lot of former missileers, and they just say cheating goes on everywhere. And it's been going on for quite a long time.
What we did was we look at the evidence. Whenever we saw a cell phone, whether it was a text message or an email, we investigated that.
One of the people who told us about this cheating being endemic was an instructor at this base and left last year.
Well, I will tell you that as a commander, if I have any indication that people aren't following our core values, I immediately attack the problem. And we have not seen this problem at the other 2 bases.
The former missileers told us that the Missile Corps has long been treated like the stepchild of the Air Force. Pilots get all the glory. Missileers have fewer chances for advancement.
We're going to review the monthly lesson plan, and then we're going to take a test.
It's said that the reason for the cheating is a culture of perfection, where missileers have felt they had to get 100% on the tests they take 3 times a month or face no chance of promotion. We spoke to a group of current missileers at Warren Air Force Base, including 26-year-old Daniel Sharp from Tennessee. Why did people feel they had to score 100%?
When I first came here, leadership that was in place told me that the minimum passing score for my test was a 90%. But if I was making 90s, I was a D student, and I would be treated that way.
But you actually were here under that 100% pressure yourself.
I was.
Yeah, and you felt the pressure, and that caused stress, I'm sure of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it also caused a great deal of studying and a great deal of proficiency. So.
No one cheated because they had to, they didn't know the material. They cheated in order to get 100.
Is that gone?
That's gone.
So what replaces that?
Well, right now, it's pass-fail. As long as they get, above a 90, which is the standard.
Wait, pass, it's still pass, you fail at 90?
It's still at 90 right now.
Wow. How is that improving things?
When you take away the pressure of getting 100 on a test, you have people focus on what they need to know. I think it changes things.
It's one of a number of things the general's doing to boost morale, which by most accounts has been low for a long time, even at the top. Last year, Weinstein's predecessor, Major General Michael Carey, was relieved of command for drunken and inappropriate behavior during an official trip to Moscow. According to an inspector general's report, Carey complained that its troops had the worst morale of any airman in the Air Force. How many of you chose to be a missileer as your first choice for a military career? 2 of you. Truth be told, the vast majority don't choose this job. This group was impressive. They majored in physics, engineering, and English, and many are working on their advanced degrees. We've obviously heard a lot about the morale problems, so I wonder what the morale problems come from.
Well, it fluctuates, and there are times where it just becomes a grind because you're doing so much in a short period of time a lot of times, and you just have to adapt and work with the schedule you're given.
So it can be more than 24 hours?
Of course, weather does impact how long we might be downstairs. If we have poor weather, especially during the winter, we do get that a lot in these northern bases. You might be down there for 48 hours at a time or possibly 72.
Anybody been down for 72? No, 48?
48, yes.
Yeah, 48, a lot of you. They told us they feel things are improving, and they also assured us there are many safeguards built into the systems of the Launch Control Centers, or LCCs, to prevent an unauthorized launch.
Launch key inserted. Inserted.
Are any of you partners?
Yes, ma'am.
You're partners. Okay, just for the sake of this discussion, let's say both of you go bonkers, and you get the key out and you switch it on. Will it go off?
No, ma'am.
No.
It won't go off.
No.
Why not?
Because there are enable codes that we need in order to get the missile ready for launching.
Only the President of the United States could authorize the launch of nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And one capsule by themselves can't do it alone.
Right.
And you would have to receive the codes to put them in? You don't have them when you go into the LCC?
No, ma'am.
No.
Okay. Well, that's reassuring. An important part of their job is monitoring the condition of the missiles. If they get a signal that something's wrong, they ask for a maintenance crew to fix it. Oh, wow. The maintenance crews train on this missile that is virtually identical to the real thing, minus the rocket fuel and warhead. The systems are so complex, the technicians work off detailed checklists.
Torque to mouth separation all the way around. 2.
They're constantly shouting 2, 2,
2.
because the rules require there always be 2 people keeping an eye on one another when they work on a nuclear missile.
2.
The idea is to ensure safety and prevent sabotage.
2.
Sometimes these Minutemen IIIs have to be removed from their silos for repairs or for random test launches, without the warhead, of course, to make sure the missiles still work. These missiles were designed and built during the Cold War, when there was always the fear of a nuclear attack from the Soviet Union. But the second in command of all U.S. nuclear forces said recently that he's more concerned about an accident or human error than a Russian attack. When we come back, we'll tell you about some mishaps in the past that nearly led to accidental nuclear detonations on U.S. soil. For more than 50 years, land-based nuclear missiles and long-range bombers have played a key role in America's strategy to deter other nations from using their nuclear weapons against us. But the age of the equipment is a problem, and human error is always a concern. Small mistakes, like a dropped socket, can mean the difference between routine maintenance and a major accident. We were not aware until we started researching this story how many close calls there have been involving nuclear weapons. Fires, plane crashes, fuel explosions, even a bomb that was accidentally dropped on U.S. soil. The seriousness of many of these incidents was not disclosed at the time, but based on witness accounts and declassified government documents, we have a much better understanding today of how close we have come to a nuclear disaster.
We came close on numerous occasions during the Cold War to having our own weapons detonate accidentally on American soil.
Eric Schlosser spent 6 years investigating nuclear weapons mishaps during the Cold War. His book, Command and Control, describes a number of hair-raising incidents, like a rocket fuel explosion in 1980 in Damascus, Arkansas, that forced the evacuation of people living near a Titan II missile complex.
Someone dropped a socket in the silo, and the socket fell about 70 feet, pierced the missile, caused a fuel leak, and then there was a huge explosion.
If that exploded, how come you say there was no detonation?
They put safety mechanisms in the warheads to make sure they only detonate over the target where they're supposed to, and that's a testament to the engineering skill of the warhead designers and to good luck.
Schlosser says that's not the only time we were lucky. A few days after John Kennedy's inauguration in 1961, an Air Force B-52 like this one had mechanical problems and accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb over Goldsboro, North Carolina.
When it hit the ground, the firing signal was sent, but one safety switch prevented a full-scale detonation of a powerful hydrogen bomb in North Carolina.
I'm kind of shocked because I didn't hear the story.
Yeah.
Ever, did I? Until you revealed it? Was that made public?
There was a real effort throughout the Cold War to deny that there was any possibility that a nuclear weapon could detonate by accident.
Today's Minuteman III missiles use rocket fuel that's more stable and less likely to explode. And they've upgraded some key components, too, like the guidance systems that direct the missiles toward their target.
The nuclear weapons themselves, the warhead, the bombs, are much safer than they were 30 years ago. There's no question about that. But the infrastructure, the equipment, what carries those weapons?
The Minuteman itself goes back
to the Nixon administration.
The Nixon administration.
Look at it this way. If you got a beautiful sports car from the 1960s, it would drive really fast and it would be fun to drive.
Right.
But a modern car is going to have so many more safety mechanisms that are so much more sophisticated. And the architecture, the command and control architecture, is complicated and aging.
How would you evaluate the risk of an accident happening? Human error kind of thing.
The probability is as close to zero as you can get.
Major General Jack Weinstein's first job as a young airman was manning one of those launch control centers. Today, he's in charge of all 450 land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles in the U.S. You have said that you sleep well at night.
That's a direct quote.
Some people would say you shouldn't be sleeping well at night. You should be constantly worried because you have a very complex system here, and there are a lot of things that could go wrong.
The people that designed this weapon system in the 1960s, even though we've made upgrades, are actually brilliant, and there's a lot of safety mechanisms built into the system.
But during our visit to the Underground Control Center with Colonel Carl Jones, we got a glimpse of what the Missile Corps is up against. Take this enormous outer door designed to protect the corridor leading to the capsule. They can't close it because of a broken part, so it's propped open with a crowbar and marked with a danger tag. We were told the door has been disabled like this for years.
Many things in the capsule, in the equipment building, aren't manufactured anymore. So we have to figure out a way to manufacture that piece and see if the new piece will work.
At a missile silo we visited, time and frigid weather had clearly taken their toll. The missile was being pulled from the silo for repairs because water had seeped in.
It's probably the worst case of loose nukes in U.S. military history.
Some nuclear weapons snafus have happened fairly recently. In 2007, 6 nuclear-tipped cruise missiles were loaded onto a B-52 by mistake. flown across the country and left unguarded on the tarmac. No one noticed for 36 hours. That led then Defense Secretary Robert Gates to ask the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff to resign. In 2010, because of a technical glitch, a missile squadron at the base we visited in Wyoming stopped receiving electronic messages from the missiles it was charged with monitoring.
What happened was we lost status monitoring of 50 missiles.
50 missiles?
50. It was a squadron.
For an hour?
A little under an hour, but an hour.
What word would you use to describe that? Is it serious? Was it dangerous?
I don't view it as dangerous at all because of the safety of the weapon system. I would call it serious when you lose status monitoring for that period of time.
Being able to communicate with the missiles and with others on the base is essential to a missileer's job. So we were surprised to learn they were having trouble hearing what was being said on their phones.
Can you repeat that?
What about the phones?
They're awful.
Yeah, they're not so great.
What isn't great about them? Is it what, the hearing, or is it that you can't connect when you make a call?
It's
or?
both. I mean, you can't hear the other person on the other end of the line. Sometimes you can't dial out, which makes it very difficult if you're trying to do your job.
Just to be clear, the president will not be calling them on the phone with his launch orders. They have other, more secure systems for that. But still,
it is an analog system. And when you have an analog system, there are problems. We're looking at upgrading that in the next few years.
Years?
In the next few
Not
years.
Months.
No, years.
And they're using really, really, really old computers. I saw a floppy disk, and not a floppy disk that size. It was gigantic.
I'll tell you, those older systems provide us some, I will say, huge safety when it comes to some cyber issues that we currently have in the world.
Now explain that.
A few years ago, we did a complete analysis of our entire network. Cyber engineers found out that the system is extremely safe and extremely secure on the way it's developed.
Meaning that you're not up on the internet, that
We're
kind
not
of
up
thing?
on the internet.
So did the cyber people recommend you keep it the way it is?
For right now, yes.
A terrorist attack is also a major concern. This tactical security team trains constantly to take back a missile silo from the bad guys if they ever get in. Once the team enters the compound and secures the site, they go down into the silo, fast roping and drawing their guns quicker than most of us can tie a shoelace. The land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, the ICBMs, that we saw are just one part of the nuclear triad that includes missiles on submarines and bombers. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that operating and upgrading all three legs of the triad is going to cost at least $355 billion over the next 10 years. Do we need all three legs of the triad?
I think that the one leg of the triad that may be the least useful are our missiles.
The land-based?
The land-based missiles are targets. The Russians know exactly where they are. It puts the states where they're based at risk, whereas with submarines, they're hidden. One of the things about a bomber is if the bomber takes off with nuclear weapons and you change your mind, you can have the bomber come back to the base, and you can't do that with a land-based missile.
The land-based leg of the triad. Do we need to have that?
I think it's extremely important to have an on-alert, 24/7 nuclear capability to protect our nation. I think we need to look at the problem set sometimes in the eyes of other nations. When other nations are upgrading their ICBM force, they're modernizing their ICBM force, I think it's extremely important that we provide the American public with that day-to-day deterrent value that the ICBM provides.
And that's the mission.
And that's the mission.
Hands on keys and switches.
We were watching missileers practicing their procedures in a simulator.
Mark.
Would you like to key turn?
Yes. When one of the instructors offered us a chance to do a practice launch. It was simple enough to turn the switches.
Turn.
Hold it. Hold it. Okay, release.
So how
many missiles did I actually launch? 1 or 10?
You launched 50.
I launched 50.
50.
I would say everybody here would remember their first alert. You ride your elevator down, you go through those first 2 massive blast doors, and you're looking at the same console you've been training on for so long, but this one is tethered directly to 10 nuclear weapons with status monitoring for an additional 40. And that weighs on you, absolutely weighs on you.
We left the base more aware of the pressures these young officers are under and hoping their superiors will get around to fixing those phones and broken doors. Recently, the Air Force announced it would spend $19 million this year to upgrade the launch control centers and silos. And it's asking for over $600 million next year to make further improvements.
Without most of us noticing, our everyday activities, everything from getting cash at an ATM to watching this program, depend on satellites in space. And for the U.S. military, it's not just everyday activities. The way it fights depends on space. Satellites are used to communicate with troops, gather intelligence, fly drones, and target weapons. But top military and intelligence leaders are now worried those satellites are vulnerable to attack. They say China in particular has been actively testing anti-satellite weapons that could, in effect, knock out America's eyes and ears. No one wants a war in space, but it's the job of a branch of the Air Force called Space Command to prepare for one. If you've never heard of Space Command, it's because most of what it does happens hundreds, even thousands of miles above the Earth or deep inside highly secure command centers. You may be as surprised as we were to find out how the high-stakes game for control of space is played.
The research being done at the Starfire Optical Range in Albuquerque, New Mexico was kept secret for many years. And for a good reason, which only becomes apparent at night. First, the roof of one building is open to the stars. Then the walls retract, and an object straight out of Star Wars appears, shooting a laser into the sky. The laser's beam helps a high-powered telescope focus in on objects in space, so the Air Force can get a better look at the satellites of potential adversaries like China whizzing by at 17,000 miles per hour. It's part of a complex and mostly secret battle for what the military considers the ultimate high ground.
There is no such thing as a day without space.
That's the mantra of General John Hyten, the head of Air Force Space Command.
Think of what life used to be like and all the things that we have today in warfare that wouldn't exist without space. Remotely piloted aircraft, all-weather precision-guided munitions didn't exist before space. Now we can attack any target on the planet, anytime, anywhere, in any weather.
What would the U.S. military do without space?
What happens is you go back to World War II. You go back to industrial age warfare.
And your job is to make sure there is no day without space.
Absolutely.
And you should be thinking right from the beginning that this is a contested environment. And how
Hyten drills into his troops that U.S. satellites are no longer safe from attack. 11 countries, including Iran and North Korea, now have the ability to launch objects into orbit. And Russia and China have been testing new anti-satellite technologies.
That's a competition that I wish wasn't occurring, but it is. And if we're threatened in space, we have the right of self-defense. And we'll make sure we can execute that right.
And use force if necessary.
That's why we have a military. You know, I'm not NASA.
Space Command has 38,000 airmen at 134 locations around the world.
Well, if you look at
one of their most visible missions is to make sure U.S. satellites can always get into space, from launch pads like this one at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California.
This is where space begins. If you can't get the satellite into space, it's worthless. I'm a satellite guy, so I get very nervous around rockets because the most valuable thing on the rocket is the top, is the satellite. Because when you have 500,000 pounds of thrust, if anything goes wrong, it's an explosion, it's dangerous, and you lose the capabilities that's on the top.
T-minus 15 seconds, stand by for
The U.S. has more satellites in space than any other nation, over 500 and counting. More than 30 military and civilian launches will take place this year at Space Command bases in Florida and California.
0.
The Pentagon told us it spends $10 billion a year on space, but we found a White House report that estimates the real cost is much higher, $25 billion when you count spy satellites and other classified spending. That's more than NASA or any other space agency in the world. Some of those satellites provide the GPS signals that guide smart bombs now attacking ISIS targets in Iraq and Syria. But a lot of people don't realize those same GPS satellites provide the signals your smartphone uses to navigate. It's a service the Air Force provides free, not just here in the United States, but to the entire world.
This is a global utility, and there's a lot of people depending on this, and we understand that.
At a Boeing plant in Los Angeles, Colonel Bill Cooley showed us a GPS satellite that was being tested in a special chamber to make sure it was ready for launch.
When these things get on orbit, there's no depot. You can't drive it back into the maintenance shop. It's somewhat like trying to design an automobile that is going to run for 12 to 15 years, and you can't take it in the shop, you can't take it in for refueling, but it's got to run 24/7.
In orbit, the satellite will spread out its solar panels, point its odd-looking antennas toward the Earth, and broadcast its location along with a time signal accurate to nanoseconds. A GPS receiver needs signals from 4 of these satellites to figure out its location. Colonel Cooley told us it costs $250 million to design and build each one.
And to put it into space, how much does it cost?
Yeah, that's about the same.
So you're pushing $500 million to get that thing into space.
That's right.
The U.S. has 31 active GPS satellites in space right now, and a lot more than smart bombs and smartphones depend on them. Bank ATMs, cell phone towers, and power grids use their signals. Farmers use GPS to work their fields.
So at your active time, you're just going to go active.
The GPS satellite system the whole world relies on is operated out of this room at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado by Lieutenant Colonel Todd Benson and his team.
Pre-pass SVN 34.
We were a little surprised by how many people it takes.
8 personnel.
8 people?
Yes, sir.
For the entire world?
Yes, sir.
Are these technological experts?
Yes, sir. But they're as young as 19 years old.
Isn't there a minimum age for driving satellites?
Not here.
Another thing that surprised us is there's no way to effectively armor an important satellite like this, or to conceal its location from attack.
So it can't hide in space?
That's true. And in fact, it tells you where it is.
This is a system the whole world depends on. Costs a small fortune to put it up there, and it's a sitting duck.
Well, this is one of the challenges that in Space Command that we are very aware of.
Today, can a U.S. military satellite maneuver itself out of the way of an upcoming anti-satellite weapon?
It depends on a huge number of variables.
So the answer is maybe?
The answer is maybe.
So you've got these satellites worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they maybe could get out of harm's way?
Depends on the satellite, it depends on the mission, it depends on when it was built, depends on how old it is, it depends on when we know the threat is coming.
Knowing a threat is coming is no small task when the territory you're responsible for is 73 trillion cubic miles. Space Command maintains a global network of radars, telescopes, and satellite communications antennas like this one.
And you can see the magnetic lines just, they're looping all over.
All the information feeds into the Joint Space Operations Center, JSPOC for short, at Vandenberg Air Force Base.
This is the command center for space?
Yes, sir. 24/7, 365 days a year, maintaining.
If a U.S. satellite were attacked, Lieutenant General Jay Raymond would use this phone to alert a chain of command leading to the White House.
Is an attack on an American satellite an act of war?
That's been a line of debate for as long as I've been in this business.
If there is an attempt to attack or interfere with the U.S. satellite, who makes the decision about what we do about it?
That'd be the President of the United States.
And it's not just an anti-satellite weapon they're worried about. There are other dangers, too.
Today, we track about 23,000 objects.
How many of them are actually functioning satellites?
Roughly 1,300 of those are active satellites. The rest are debris.
Junk?
Yes, sir, junk.
contact with debris. Debris is from a BSE sat.
The movie Gravity dramatized the devastating effect man-made debris traveling at 17,000 miles per hour could have on the International Space Station. The JSPOC tracks dead satellites, old rocket boosters, even stray space gloves, and alerts satellite operators and astronauts if a collision is likely.
Last year, in 2014, the International Space Station was maneuvered 3 times to avoid colliding with a piece of debris.
A lot of the debris that's threatening the space station was created in 2007 when the Chinese tested a ground-based anti-satellite weapon. It crashed into one of their old weather satellites 530 miles above the Earth, shattering it into pieces.
This is the debris that resulted from the 2007 Chinese ASAT. So this is about 3,000 pieces of debris just from that one event.
That came just from that one collision?
Just from that one collision.
Debris apart, how important was that test in terms of revealing Chinese space capabilities?
It was a significant wake-up call to our entire military. Until that singular event, I don't think the broader military realized that that is something we're going to have to worry about.
Have they conducted any similar tests since?
They continue to conduct tests. The testing they're doing is to make sure that if they ever got into a conflict with us or any other spacefaring nation, they would have the ability to destroy satellites. And that is a bad thing for the United States, a bad thing for the planet.
A bad thing, no doubt. But is the U.S. doing it too? And did China recently raise the stakes, test firing a weapon deeper into space than ever before and threatening some of this country's most valuable satellites? That part of our story when we come back. Tonight, we've been giving you a rare look at how a branch of the U.S. Air Force called Space Command is preparing for a battle most of us have never thought about, one high above the Earth, defending the satellites upon which our daily life and national security have come to depend. Few of those satellites are more important to the U.S. military than the ones that provide early warning of a long-range nuclear missile attack. Even at the height of the Cold War, those satellites stationed deep in space, some 20,000 miles above the Earth, were considered safe from attack. But deep space is no longer the sanctuary it once was. A former Space Command officer told us that 2 years ago, the Chinese tested an anti-satellite weapon that went higher than any previously reported, and came too close for comfort to the area where those missile warning satellites are located.
If those satellites are now at risk, that is something that, from the U.S. military's point of view, is new. Because it's always believed those satellites, there wasn't really a significant threat to those capabilities.
Brian Whedon served as an officer in Air Force Space Command until 2007. He's now technical advisor to the Secure World Foundation, which promotes the peaceful use of space.
The topic for today's discussion
Whedon says the Chinese have test-fired as many as 6 ground-based anti-satellite weapons. Only one in 2007 actually hit a satellite and created debris, but one of the others soared to new heights.
There was one test in May of 2013 that may have gone as high as 30,000 kilometers. And that's one that I think really is kind of causing quite a bit of concern on the U.S. side.
To understand just how far that is, the International Space Station orbits at about 200 miles above the Earth, and those GPS satellites we showed you orbit at 12,000 miles. The 2013 test launch Whedon's talking about is believed to have gone up to 18,600 miles, just shy of what's known as geosynchronous or geostationary orbit. And that's where the U.S. military has stationed some of its most valuable missile warning sensors and top-secret communications devices that serve as its eyes and ears in time of war.
I think what keeps a lot of American military planners up at night is if China has anti-satellite capabilities, when do they use those in a conflict? Do they use them at the start to try and blind the U.S.?
Those sound like the crown jewels of American satellites up there in geosynchronous orbit.
Absolutely. Those satellites were developed in an environment where the U.S. assumed there would not be reason to attack them. So you end up with a small number of very expensive satellites that have a lot of capability packed onto each one. End result is juicy targets.
A spokesman for China's foreign ministry admitted testing an anti-satellite weapon in 2007. But China has denied conducting subsequent tests and told us it is committed to the peaceful use of outer space. It said the 2013 launch into deep space was simply a science experiment. But using skills he honed as an officer in Space Command, Brian Whedon analyzed commercial satellite photos and other publicly available data about the launch. He concluded that science experiment was probably fired into space by a military missile launcher like this.
This building was built in the...
General John Hyten, the head of Air Force Space Command, has seen the classified intelligence about that launch.
These follow-on Chinese tests, how high up do they go?
Pretty high.
Well, how high is that?
I won't characterize what the Chinese capabilities are. I just will tell you that we know what they are.
Well, I've read reports by a congressional commission which said that in the next 5 to 10 years, China likely will be able to hold at risk U.S. national security satellites in every orbital regime. Do you agree with this statement by the commission?
I think they'll be able to threaten every orbital regime that we operate in. Now, we have to figure out how to defend those satellites, and we're going to.
Space Command is making its new satellites more maneuverable to evade attack, and also more resistant to jamming. It's building a new radar system that will enable the Space Operations Center to track objects in space as small as a softball. And it's deployed 2 highly maneuverable surveillance satellites to keep watch on what other countries are doing high up in geostationary orbit.
Satellites watching other satellites.
Satellites watching other satellites.
And how do they improve your knowledge?
Because they're up close.
Normally, the capabilities of spy satellites are kept top secret. But Space Command put out this fact sheet about its new assets in geosynchronous orbit.
We want people to understand that we're watching. There will be no surprises in geo, and we want everybody in the world to know that there will be no surprises in that orbit. It's way too valuable for us to just be surprised.
Deterrence in the nuclear world was built on weapons.
Right, and deterrence in the space world has got to be built on a little bit different construct. It's the ability to convince an adversary that if they attack us, they will fail.
Air Force Secretary Deborah Lee James told us the Pentagon plans to spend an extra $5 billion over the next 5 years to protect its satellites.
What do you consider to be the greatest single threat to U.S. satellites?
An anti-satellite weapon would certainly be a great threat. A laser would be a threat. Jamming capabilities are also a threat.
Do China and Russia have lasers that could blind American satellites?
They are testing and investing, and that is worrisome to the United States.
All right, good morning, Bravo crew. We're going to start it off with intel.
Testing and investing in sometimes mysterious ways.
Hey, Russia is going to be launching a Soyuz 2.
Last year, airmen at the Joint Space Operations Center monitored the seemingly routine launch of 3 Russian communications satellites. Lieutenant General Jay Raymond and his team spotted what they assumed was just an ordinary piece of debris from the launch.
About a week later, a young Air Force captain detected that debris started to move.
Move as in maneuver, right up close to the body of the rocket that had launched it into space.
So what is that object that keeps maneuvering in space?
David, I'm not going to speculate, but I can tell you what it isn't. It's not a piece of debris.
That type of maneuver is what's called a rendezvous and proximity operation. And it's actually something that the U.S. has been working on for the last several years, if not longer.
Satellites that can rendezvous with other satellites may someday be used to refuel or make repairs, but they're potential weapons as well.
If you can get close enough to inspect or service another satellite, is that close enough to disable it?
Absolutely, and there's a wide range of ways you could do that.
Such as?
Breaking off a solar panel, or even some have theorized, spray painting over optics so that the satellite can't see anything.
So if you thought space was a peaceful haven, think again. This is a new kind of space race, a cosmic game of hide and seek. And the same technology that enables this telescope to see more clearly into space could potentially be used to help a laser weapon focus more powerfully on a target. The Bush administration wanted to develop such a weapon here in 2006, but ran into resistance from Congress.
Is any work being done on lasers that could be used to blind satellites?
There's no such work at this time.
Does the U.S. have any weapons in space?
No, we do not.
I'm thinking of satellites that maneuver next to another satellite and then take some action to disable it without blowing it up.
We do have satellites that maneuver, that look at things in space, but not what you just described.
Do you think the Chinese believe that?
I don't know what they believe.
When the Chinese look at America's space operations, they see a program that by most estimates spends 10 times more than they do and has tested anti-satellite weapons of its own. Space Command told us an American F-15 fired a missile into space 5 times in the 1980s, and one of those times destroyed a U.S. satellite, creating debris that remained in space for decades. One of the officers involved in that test was General Hyten.
I think it was a surprise to most people on that program how much debris we created.
So where do we get off lecturing the Chinese about testing anti-satellite weapons if we were the first and if we created debris?
Well, because we learned our lesson and told the world, and the Congress said you will not test that weapon anymore.
But when a U.S. intelligence satellite containing hazardous fuel malfunctioned in 2008, the Navy's Aegis defense system, designed to knock out incoming missiles, was used to shoot it down.
Chinese must think we've got an anti-satellite capability as well.
I think they certainly have come to that conclusion, or not. If the U.S. doesn't have a capability, they certainly could field one very quickly.
What you just described is the formula for an arms race. They see a capability, we have a capability, they react to that capability, they react, we react, and there you go.
I think it certainly could turn out that way.
One of the big dangers is that a problem in space could inflame a conflict here on Earth. For instance, if a nation suddenly lost its early warning satellites in the middle of a crisis, it might assume it was the beginning of an attack.
Now, in reality, it might have been a simple manufacturing failure. It might have been a piece of space debris. But in the moment of crisis, I think that's the sort of situation that could escalate something that might otherwise have stayed partly contained.
General Hyten told us Space Command is currently only developing weapons that do not create debris, like this mobile jammer, which can be used to incapacitate satellites.
We have a capability called a counter-communication system that is built to deny an adversary the use of space communications. All I can say is it's a capability that exists on the ground, and it does not create debris in any way.
The only two things you've told me about the U.S. ability to fight in space are the ability to maneuver your satellites and to jam other satellites. Is that it?
That's not it, but that's all I can tell you.
One secret project is hiding in plain sight. It's the X-37B spaceplane, a small, remotely piloted vehicle that can fly in space for 20 months at a time.
This is a model of the space.
A model of it hangs in Hyten's headquarters in Colorado.
So here's your chance to end all the speculation about what the space plane is really for.
It's really for cool things.
For instance?
For instance, it goes up to space, but unlike other satellites, it actually comes back. Anything that we put in the payload bay that we take up to space, we can now bring back, and we can learn from that.
Can you tell me whether or not someday the space plane is going to become a weapons system?
The intent is, I cannot answer that question.
But if you're determined not to create any more debris in space, why can't you say that this might not become a weapons system?
I'm not going to say what it's going to become, because we're experimenting.
Hyten told us there are bound to be conflicts in space. The important thing is to avoid a shooting war that could create so much debris it might become impossible to put satellites or astronauts into orbit.
The Chinese, of course, look at everything you're doing.
I'm sure they're looking at this.
And they say you're developing the capability to threaten them, and that all those satellites are a direct threat to their national security. So why wouldn't they create a capability to take out those satellites?
You know, the Chinese are also building a very robust exploration program to go to the moon, to explore the stars, they could destroy their entire program by going down the way they are.
There's not a shooting war going on out there, but it sure does seem like there is a very high-stakes contest going on in space.
It is high stakes.
High stakes with very few rules. The 1967 UN treaty calls for the peaceful use of space. That sounds nice, but leaves a lot of room for countries to do what they want.
Right now, is there any code of conduct for space operations?
There is not an agreed-upon code of conduct.
So it's every country for himself?
Pretty much.